If the sun's entire power was focused on one spot, you'd be vaporized instantly. Like, not even a trace of you left. It would be over before your brain could even register pain. The fastest death in this entire video. But don't worry, we're not putting you at ground zero. That would be too merciful. And just wait till you see what happens at different distances. It's absolutely terrifying. The sun outputs 3.8 times 10 to the power of 26 watts of power. That's 380 septillion watts every single second. Now imagine all of that energy, everything the sun radiates in every direction across the entire solar system, focused into a beam the size of a basketball court. Yeah, this is going to be bad. At ground zero, where the beam hits, the temperature would instantly reach 200 million degrees Celsius. That's 13 times hotter than the core of the sun itself. Matter doesn't just melt at these temperatures. It doesn't even vaporize. It skips straight to plasma. You know, the fourth state of matter, the stuff stars are made of? Yeah, you'd become that. It would take 1/1,000,000th of a second for every atom in your body to be ripped apart. Your molecules would disintegrate. Your atoms would ionize. You'd literally become a cloud of charged particles expanding at a significant fraction of the speed of light. There wouldn't be time for pain receptors to fire. There wouldn't be time for neurons to send signals. You'd go from a person to a puff of superheated gas before the concept of dying could even start. I give ground zero a 10 out of 10. Honestly, best way to go in this scenario: quick, painless, and you get to become star stuff. Very poetic. But let's say you're 1 kilometer away from the impact point. Surely that's far enough, right? You'd be okay at this distance? Yeah, no, not even close. The moment the beam hits, you'd see a light brighter than 1,000 suns. Literally, your retinas would be seared instantly. Permanent blindness in a millisecond. But that's the least of your problems. Because here's the thing, at this distance, you're about to experience thermal radiation like nothing that's ever existed on Earth. Warning, extreme radiation detected. Surface temperature rising. The air around you would heat up to 50,000 degrees Celsius in the first second. You know what happens to a human body at 50,000 degrees? Flash combustion. Your skin would ignite. Not burn, ignite. Like a piece of paper in a blowtorch. After 1 second, your entire outer layer would be on fire. The moisture in your skin would explosively boil. Steam would burst from your pores. Your hair would flash into ash. Can't see. Everything's burning. Why is everything burning? In the next 2 seconds, the heat would penetrate deeper. Your muscle tissue would start to cook from the outside in. The proteins in your cells would denature. Your blood would start to boil in your veins. You'd feel it. Oh, you'd definitely feel it. Like being dipped in molten metal while still conscious. Warning, core body temperature 60 degrees Celsius and rising. Organ failure imminent. After 5 seconds, your internal organs would shut down. Your brain would be cooking in your skull. You'd lose consciousness somewhere around this point. Probably a mercy. After 10 seconds, what's left of you would be a charred, unrecognizable husk. 1 kilometer away gets a 2 out of 10. Would not recommend. Alright, let's try 10 kilometers. That's gotta be safer. You're 6 miles away from the impact. Surely the atmosphere will protect you at this distance. Well, not exactly. The shockwave would hit you first. When that much energy slams into the Earth's surface, it doesn't just make heat, it makes pressure. The air itself would compress into a wall, moving at hypersonic speeds. We're talking Mach 50. That's 17 kilometers per second. What's that sound? Is that thunder? That doesn't sound like thunder. The shockwave would reach you in about half a second. And when it hits, every bone in your body would shatter instantly. The pressure differential would be so extreme that your internal organs would rupture. Your lungs would collapse, your eardrums would explode, you'd be thrown backwards at hundreds of kilometers per hour, already dead before you hit the ground. But wait, there's more. Because even if you somehow survived the shockwave, the thermal pulse would cook you anyway. At 10 kilometers, you'd still experience temperatures around 3,000 degrees Celsius. That's hot enough to melt steel. Your protective gear would fail. Your spacesuit would melt onto your skin. You'd be fused with your equipment as everything liquefies together. 10 kilometers gets a 1 out of 10. At least the shockwave kills you before you feel the burning. Small mercies. Now let's look at 100 kilometers away. Surely you're safe here. You're 62 miles from the impact point. That's like being in another city. Come on, what if, guy? This has got to be survivable. Well, here's the thing. When you punch a hole through the atmosphere with 380 septillion watts of concentrated solar power, things get weird. The beam would bore straight through the atmosphere, superheating the air in a column from space to ground. This creates what's basically a vacuum tube of plasma. When the beam shuts off, the atmosphere rushes back in. But it's not gentle, it's violent. It creates a secondary shockwave, firestorms, and something meteorologists would call apocalyptic weather patterns. At 100 kilometers, you'd see the entire horizon light up like a second sun appeared on Earth. The thermal radiation would give you third-degree burns on any exposed skin. The electromagnetic pulse from all that ionized air would fry every electronic device for hundreds of kilometers. Your communication systems would fail. Your life support would fail if it's electronic. Warning, warning, warning. Multiple system failures. And then there's the firestorm. The beam would ignite everything flammable within 50 kilometers of the impact point. Those fires would create their own weather system, generating winds of 300 kilometers per hour, pulling air toward the burning zone. You'd either suffocate as oxygen gets pulled away, or you'd be pulled into the firestorm yourself. After 30 minutes, you might still be alive, barely, burned, blind, equipment failing, surrounded by an inferno. You'd have maybe a few hours before dehydration, radiation sickness, or good old-fashioned heat stroke finished you off. 100 kilometers gets a 3 out of 10. You get to live long enough to really regret being anywhere near this experiment. And here's the terrifying part. The crater at ground zero would be 15 kilometers wide and 5 kilometers deep. The shockwave would shatter windows 500 kilometers away. The atmospheric disruption would affect weather patterns globally for months. Millions would die from the secondary effects alone. So, what if the sun's entire power was focused on one spot? Well, you'd create the most destructive weapon imaginable, a planet-killing beam that would make nuclear weapons look like firecrackers. And wherever you were when it fired, you'd be having a very bad day. That's it for this solar-powered nightmare. But that's a story for another Imagine That.